Sponsored by the Big 98, Nashville's #1 for new country and the home of the Bobby Bones Show.
We're so thrilled to have on Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, guitarist, singer, songwriter, a man of many talents, Jeff "Skunk" Baxter. Jeff, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for your hospitality. I really
I
appreciate it.
love your new solo album. Obviously, what a great body of work you've had in your career and still doing a lot of music, a lot of playing. Speed of Heat, out now. What an incredible album. Why this long to do a solo album?
Well, I think I had a little bit of resistance to the, as soon as you leave a very successful band, first thing you got to go do is a solo record. I think the record companies and everybody wants to, we have this momentum and stuff. I said, no, I'm going to wait until it makes sense to me. I've got a ton of studio work to do on producing records. I have my day job that I got to do, and I just want to wait until the time is right. So I worked with a friend of mine, very close friend of mine, named CJ Vanston, who we started playing together, and just in bits and pieces. He was a busy guy too.
Right.
So it was a kind of, you put the pennies in the jar, and when you got enough pennies, you got to roll them up and go to the bank, and so that's kind of how that all worked out.
Well, and listening to the album, going through the songs, and you certainly gave a nod to some of your past work, obviously with Steely Dan and with the Doobie Brothers, but also on this album, the guests that you brought on, including Michael McDonald and Clint Black, and your own voice. It's like, I love the story to where, you wanted to have Steven Tyler from Aerosmith.
Yeah, I asked Steve if he could do something. Yeah.
Was going to sing, and then he sends back the track and goes, "No, Skunk, you sound great."
Well, I said, are you pulling my leg? And he said, no, I'm serious. So I said, well, he knows more about the stuff than I do. So
what a great compliment, though.
Well, he's a very good guy, too. He's an old friend.
Well, and speaking of which, growing up as a guitar player and trying to figure out your solos and incredible work that you've done with so many. I remember back in the day, dating myself, where I would slow down the album and try and figure out your solos, like for Steely Dan, for like My Old School, and so many of these great solos that you did, and trying to pick them out. And that's what I had to do back in the day, because I'm like going, I got to figure out what Jeff is doing on this.
Well, then those were the days where turntables were 78, 45, 33, and 16.
Right.
So I was doing the same thing as a kid, and I did that on a Les Paul cut called Lover. I had slowed it down to try to get it right. So years later, Les and I had become friends, and we were doing a gig together. And he said, let's play Lover. I said, oh, that's great. I remember working on Les Kid. So I'm rocking away at it, and we finally finished the song, and he's laughing. I said, Les, what's so funny? He says, that fast part,
right.
I slowed it down and sped it up. And she was just laughing. I said, well, Les, at least, it's like giving me a guitar lesson. I appreciate it.
That is crazy. And you used to play, at Fat Tuesday and the Iridium with him, right?
Yeah.
What? I mean, and for you on it, Jeff, to, be able to play and be a part of, as a session musician also, with so many of your icons, what's that been like in your career? Because you've played on, Donna Summer's albums, Dolly Parton, so many of these incredible artists that are friends of yours.
That's part of it. In the beginning, it's kind of a professional. You're a studio musician, your job and your trade and your craft is to do everything that you can to support and finally help the artist realize whatever vision that they have. Mm-hmm. But after a while, you begin to be friends with a lot of these people. You work on their records over, at different times.
Right.
And yeah, it's a delightful opportunity. You feel kind of in the cusp between a tradesman and not a part of the band, but somebody who they can count on to contribute.
Well, and once again, on the new album, I love the sound of Michael McDonald's voice on the song that you guys worked together as well. And certainly you and I were talking about Apache. Classic guitar, and you really brought your own. Also on My Old School, it's like your version just rocks. And it's like, and I never rethought of it in that kind of style and your interpretation for this album.
Well, when I was in Steely Dan, I used to sing it live. And obviously, when you're playing live, things get a little bit more energy, get a little bit more going. And then one day I thought about it. I said, this song has got a lot of potential in terms of what it could really do. Mm-hmm. So when I was making a list of things that I wanted to do, Actually, it was just going to be an instrumental record. That's why Apache and all that. And then when Mike McDonald said that he'd like to do something on it, I was absolutely thrilled. And I thought, well, yeah, okay. Now let's look at some other possibilities. And I thought about my old school. I said, I'll take, maybe I can get Steve to sing it.
And what I love
I don't
too.
consider myself a singer.
Well, I think you sounded great,
You're very
and
kind.
certainly, knowing you from your great guitar work and everything. But I think the album speaks to your many influences and styles also, such as having Clint Black on. How did you end up bringing Clint onto this album?
I was up in Central California doing a thing that we do every year, and it was a Steely Dan night. And so obviously a bunch of great studio guys, and we were doing a bunch of Steely Dan tunes, and Clint was at the function. And I've known Clint for many, many years. He came out and said, hey, I want to play. I'm a big Steely Dan fan. I went, okay, what do you want to do? He says, well, I want to play drums. Fine, great, sit down. And what do you want to do? I want to do Parker's Band. Okay, right? And something from Countdown to Ecstasy. So we ended up playing together, and then afterwards he said, what are you up to? And I said, well, I told him about the solo project. And he said, wow, you'd like me to do something on it? And I said, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. And the criterion for both Michael and Johnny Lang and Clint was two things. You write with my partner, CJ Vanston, and you do something that was completely out of your wheelhouse, something that you would never think about doing. And he said, I'm fine with it. So he walks in the studio, plugs in his guitar, and plays the opening riff to Bad Move, which has nothing to do with country music whatsoever.
Right.
It's a real Steely Dan kind of riff.
Very.
And I looked at CJ and said, song, song, song. So we started to write from that riff.
Wow.
And yeah, he's a tremendous musician. When I played the track for his wife, she was kind of half joking. She said, who is that? I said, that's your husband. Your husband is such an amazing talent. He's got so much more depth than most people know.
Right.
Listen to this and see what kind of a musician he really is.
Yeah. And people just know him as a country music icon. And much like yourself, though, too, Jeff, to where you're able to transverse so many styles of music, whether it be rock, country, jazz, blues, everything.
Well, that's from being a studio rat.
Yeah, but I mean, but it's not an easy thing to have that musical vocabulary and to be able to be able to switch those styles, which you obviously accomplished. Before we came in studio also, we were talking about B.B. King and how you had the chance to play with him and obviously be his friend also.
A wonderful human being, and he gave me a huge compliment. I don't toot my horn, but he said, you're the best rhythm guitar player I ever heard. Now, anybody can play lead, as far as I'm concerned, if you just work on it. Rhythm is a different world. Rhythm is a world that encompasses and is tangential to, but definitely encompasses bass playing, drumming. It's a whole other world.
Right.
And I took that as a huge, huge compliment. And then, we were doing a Showtime special together, and he had a knee operation, and he was sitting down, and he said, Skunk, if I'd known that sitting down was the way to do this, I would have done this from the beginning. I said, BB, when you buy a guitar in a store, you sit down.
Yeah.
When you're in the studio, you sit down. And Mike reminded me of a story back when I was working at Dan Armstrong's guitar shop in New York on 48th Street. I was like 14. Wow. And Andres Segovia came in. He had a beautiful Ramirez. He was playing Carnegie Hall that night, but he had broken one of the tuning machines. So he brought it in because we were the only place, probably on the East Coast, where you could really bring a guitar and have it customized electronically or whatever. And so I ran across the street to Charles Ponty, right up above Manny's, and they luckily had a pair of very high-end. He was the violin, cello, luthier guy, but he happened to have a set of tuning machines. So I put them on. I went out, tuned it up, went out, and Mr. Segovia was sitting on the couch. And meanwhile, the whole thing about Dan Armstrong's shop was, we we repaired guitars for about 2 or 3 hours, and then all the players would come in, and everybody would just play. I mean, getting to play with Eddie Deal and Sam Brown. I mean, this is the great guitar players.
Right.
So that day was Mike Bloomfield and Frank Zappa, and a bunch of guys were up there. Frank was trying out a guitar that it was an SG that we had done some custom work on, and they're all standing around playing and stuff. Mr. Segovia just kind of sitting there. And so I handed him the guitar. I said, gentlemen, let's stand by for a second. So he tunes it up. He plays the first 64 bars from the Concerto de Aranjuez by Rodrigo. And whatever magic this man had, it's impossible to describe. I mean, I get chills just thinking about it. And then because I grew up in Mexico City, I speak fluent Spanish. And he said, please tell them, these gentlemen, that you don't hang it around your neck like a canoe paddle. Se pone cerca de su cuerpo, se pone cerca de tu corazón. You put it next to your heart. This is what the instrument is about. And I said, I am not going to argue with this man. Mm-mm. And yeah, I had some knee problems as well. And I used to jump around a little bit. But I realized he's absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. It is the correct way to approach the instrument.
Wow, and that's why you play seated now also.
Yeah, absolutely. And then BB said, well, if I'd known that, I said, hey, man, welcome to the club. You know?
Well, I got to tell you, Andre Segovia, one of my favorite guitarists, and just to have that interaction with him and having studied his music, I mean, it gave me goosebumps just hearing that story that and some people may not realize, it's like, you started out even playing drums and working on guitars and everything as a young person.
I started playing classical piano when I was 5.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like all these different musical things brought you to other fun bands such as Ultimate Spinach.
Yeah.
That was
fun.
And the many
Tim
bands.
Buckley.
Right.
And the Holy Modal Rounders, which was the most wackiest fun band I ever played with in my life. Yeah, they were great.
I mean, just what a storied career that you continue to live and still doing session work. And then some people may not realize either that your day job, thanks to your knowledge and just kind of, applying a unique perspective to everything you do, is working with the United States Defense Department.
Yeah, that's true. Well,
on missiles.
A radar is just a guitar on steroids. If you understand the physics of all of this, then you understand basically the key to all of this. I always tell people, maybe you don't really, if you don't understand the physics of it, you need to study it a little bit. Read a little bit about Charlie Towns, who was one of my colleagues at Lawrence Livermore, who got the Nobel Prize for inventing the laser. Charlie was a musician. Edward Teller was a concert pianist.
Wow.
Einstein was a concert violinist.
Right.
All of these guys are musicians because they understand that frequency, vibration is the glue that holds all the subatomic particles together, and that's the key to the universe. Mm-hmm. And I try to explain to people, you play guitar, right?
Right.
So when you strike the A string on a guitar, it vibrates 440 times a second, right?
Right.
It cycles through 440 times. Now you're familiar with harmonics. When you play the harmonic, it vibrates at 880 times a second, right? The third harmonic is 1620,
right, and
so on and so forth. Well, if you take A440 and multiply it times 10 to the 23rd power,
right,
the superharmonic is the color green. Wow. So the connection between the linear connection between frequency from 0 to pure energy is the core of our existence.
Right.
I mean, we're all the elements in your body were born in an exploding star. Yeah. How does all of that physics work?
Right.
I mean, Brian May knows. Brian May got his PhD in astrophysics.
Exactly.
So there's guys that get it, and so to me, it's not that far different. I know what you were referring to as nonlinear problem solving, which is something that you develop as a musician, the way that your brain develops when you're young, and applying that to intelligence analysis and stuff like that.
Right.
But the physics of it all is really what excites me, because we're all gearheads.
Yeah.
We were talking about that before, and there's something about the technology of that.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any difference. There's a linearity between that too. I mean, where did all the digital technology come from? It came from the military.
Exactly.
All of that's transistors. ARPA, invented the internet. I mean, so on. All this came from that research and development space program. All of that. So.
Well, and all of this was spurred by a neighbor next door, subscribing you to an aviation magazine.
Right, to aviation. He was
in between, playing in hit bands, doing incredible work and all this stuff, and you're reading the aviation magazine going, hey, I've got some ideas.
Absolutely. And then a musician friend of mine introduced me to Nick Cook, who was the senior aviation editor for Jane's Defense Weekly. And so I was over in London doing I was playing with the Doobie Brothers. And so somebody introduced me to Nick, and he was a music fan too. So he said, listen, I've got something I want you to see. So he said, here's an article about you can track the space shuttle with an S-band radar. Now, not to get too technical, but different radars operate in different parts of the frequency spectrum. Right. L-band, S-band, X-band. Each one has its own characteristics. So I thought, well, that's interesting because the Navy uses an S-band radar for their air defense system. So I went back to LA, talked to a steel guitar player buddy of mine who happens to be at Jet Propulsion Laboratories, working on the Viking project. And I said, John, do some math for me. So he did some math, and he says, okay, what do you try? It looks like you're trying to get some validation on tracking something with a very low radar cross section. I said, right, I can't talk to you about it now, but thank you. And that's how I wrote the paper on missile defense, and that's how I got involved. Again, frequency.
Multiple careers, and frequencies have served you well.
Yes, they have.
On multiple platforms.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, I know that Speed of Heat came out on vinyl also. I want to make sure for our viewers, because, you know, you're touring in between, you know, doing session work still and doing all the great things, you know, with frequencies. Where do our viewers need to go for your website, social media, everything, to be able to get their own vinyl copy? Obviously, they can add you to their playlist, because I love this album, and it's just incredible work. Where should our viewers go, Jeff?
Well, I think you can order from Amazon Music. I'm pretty sure, and BMG Records. They're the record company, so they probably have it. There should be information on my website and stuff. And by the way, do you know what the speed of heat is?
What is speed of heat?
Well, speed of heat is the aerodynamic and thermodynamic phenomena that happens when a body moves towards Mach 1, speed of sound. So if you look on the album cover, you'll see a bunch of equations in the background. I got a call from a buddy of mine at Northrop Grumman about 4 months ago. Said, I know what you're doing. He says, those are oblong pressure wave equations. I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. So, and we just used that because CJ Vanston, my music partner, unbelievable musician, we used that as the working title. So when we sent it to the record company, the president of the record company said, love the title of the album. I said, what's the title of the album? Because it was a working title, Speed of Heat. I said, okay, do you know what Speed of Heat is? No, I don't care. I love this title. So,
oh my gosh.
There you go. All right.
And once again, you're merging frequencies, just like you have on this album. And also the guests you brought in, like we talked earlier, Michael McDonald, Johnny Lang, Clint Black, CJ Vanston on here that worked with you.
Rick Livingstone.
Rick Livingstone, thank you. What an incredible album and showcase for you and your work and guitar playing and your vocals now.
Well, we're trying.
A man of many talents.
I'm working on it.
Well, I tell you what, I can't wait to see you live in concert. And this is an incredible album. I suggest you get the entire album on vinyl, add it to your playlist. It is The Speed of Heat. Jeff "Skunk" Baxter, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for your hospitality.
Sponsored by the Big 98, Nashville's #1 for new country and the home of a Bobby Bones Show.